is Mara Webster, and I'm the head of programming and co-founder of In Creative Company. And with me is obviously the wonderful Keri Russell, who is actor and executive producer on the show, and also current PGA and SAG Award nominee as well. And starting off, I mean, it's so crazy because you filmed season 1 a couple years ago, and you're kind of deep in the trenches for season 2 right now. And it's such an intense script to work with on a show like this. And I was interested in going into the process of season 2. How has that process changed or evolved for you, just with the level of comfort you have from having already gone through a season?
Oh, gosh, I'm trying to think of a good answer. I mean, yes, I feel like jumping into, first of all, I sat in the back and watched part of that episode because we shot this 2 years ago. I was like, well, I gotta remember what we're talking about. But Deborah Kahn, her writing is so good. I mean, that's the reason this show is so good. And this episode in particular, you know, when we made the beginning, we had a director, we were like finding it in the first 2 episodes, and then in the 3rd episode, we switched directors, and it was strange because it was a colleague of, so Deborah Kahn, who wrote the show, was one of the young writers on The West Wing. And she trained under all of those guys. And there was a young AD at the same level of her, same age, who was also a young AD on The West Wing. And that guy, Andrew Bernstein, directed that episode. And so it's so funny because he came in and then suddenly everything started to click, and it wasn't anyone's fault before or anything like that. It's just you suddenly realize what the show is going to be. And all those walking amazing shots that were so reminiscent of West Wing, and I think the humor really like turned up the volume in this episode. And just Deborah Kahn is my hero. Like, it's just like, it's amazing getting to do what she wrote, and all the other actors are so good. But so jumping into this was so hard in the first season because at first she was writing, I mean, like 6-page monologues for me over and over and over about Iran and all this motherfucking like diplomatic shit, and it was so hard to learn. And there was and when you're working every day, you don't have any time to memorize anything. So, you know, the guest actors who in this show are amazing British actors come in and they have one day that they work and they just slay because they've been working on it for 2 weeks. And then I'm like, well, I have about an hour to work on this scene, so this should be great by tomorrow. But I think Deborah was like, okay, I can't have her work every day and lift all the like political stuff. So I think in this next season she's spread the wealth a little bit, which I am very eternally grateful for. Yeah.
I mean, you were bringing up the walk and talk sequences, and those are so intrinsic in terms of the choreography. What's so great about them is there's always an intention in the writing that you can see of why are the characters moving towards a certain place. And so how does that help you, as well as your history in dance, just in kind of blocking those sorts of scenes out?
So much. I mean, I feel like I feel like the parts I love, so the only thing I'm trained in, unlike my partner who is like RADA trained, Matthew is like so fancy and, you know, can like do a million accents, and, you know, an idea of like a relaxing, fun thing for him to do is when he gets an offer to do a play reading and they're like, but can you do a German and a Russian accent? He's like, I'd love to. And I'm like, why would you want to do that? So the only thing I'm trained in really is dance, and I feel like the parts I love the most are have some kind of physical aspect to them, and I feel like this character does. I love like the boots I wear. In fact, I came into the 2nd season, and you know, my clothes I wear the same thing kind of over and over and over again, and I have these really kind of beat up boots, and then I came in the new costume designer said, "Oh, well, we got you some new boots," and I said, "I don't want new boots. I want my old boots. I like those boots." And they were like, "Well, they just thought you might want something new," and I said, "I don't want anything new. I like the way I look." And it's true. Like this character has like a way that like she walks, and it's just a part of the whole thing. And I feel like the characters I love the most to play have some sort of physical aspect to them.
And obviously, we were talking before about the heavy dialogue, but the silence to this character is just as important. You know, it's things like she stays quiet when she agrees with people. She's also an incredibly observational person who understands the importance of listening and uses that as a tool. And so how did you want to utilize silence just as much as the dialogue in the show?
That's interesting because Deborah is a very, she's an acerbic. The writing is very dense. Not all of it makes it in, obviously, but you still have to memorize it. But so I think when there are silences, they have more importance because she is so verbal, acerbic in her writing. And I think those are some of my favorite episodes when, or scenes when I don't speak, when someone else is, you know, I think she's a good watcher, Kate, and I think any ambassador or someone in politics would be. Do you guys know that Oprah thing, Masterclass? Do you guys ever watch that? So I've been like dealing with jet lag, going to London and all these things, and I watched the one on the ambassadors, Albright, Madeleine Albright, and Condoleezza Rice, and they talk about that. You have to be a good listener. You have to know many things and be open to many cultures and many people and many ways of thinking. And you know, I'm a middle kid, and I feel like I was born to be an ambassador. It's like this is the way I roll, and through life, you have to like deal with many people.
I also think it's so interesting when you see kind of shots fired at her that she very much just absorbs them and chooses not to engage. You know, even when she makes a stern look at her husband and he gets quiet and someone is like, "Oh, is that how he behaves when you're like a school marm and you're giving him a stern look?" And so for you, how did you kind of find that these are the moments where she just doesn't even have the time to engage with this?
I mean, it's really in the character that Deborah wrote. I feel like I think the fine line, and it was interesting because we got to go to the Emmys, which was really fun, and all these like silly categories of what's a drama and what's a comedy these days, and I don't even know, but you know, but I think the tone of this show and what keeps it more real and more of a drama is there's a way in which whatever you just described that I could be flippant and like do like a comedy bit about it. And I think the point is, and her driving force is that she's a serious person, and she has a goal, and she wants to get it done, and the other stuff is just fluff. Like I feel like she can absolutely go toe to toe with people, and as we just saw, like mess somebody up. But I think the point is, she has a goal in mind, and she's smart, and she the other stuff is just, you know, fluff. And so you have to, and it's hard because Deborah's really funny, so you have to keep reminding yourself of that.
And it also seems like she's someone who doesn't kind of sit in the celebration of successes when people compliment her on things. For you, was that just because there's 10 other things that have immediate urgency, or it's just not her personality as well?
Absolutely. Well, yes, I think she would be very embarrassed with accolades, but there's the work is not done, and the whole point, which comes up later than this episode, is that, you know, she left this very vitally important job to human beings in Afghanistan, and she's doing this kind of Tea Party fluff job, wearing these fancy dresses and getting in fights with her husband for doing ridiculous things, when she knows there are actual real people and young girls and women who are relying on her. And I think, yes, there's always work to be done, which is helpful.
And kind of with a bit more of the physicality as well, just, you know, the fact of how she sits on chairs and how she kind of moves around a lot. How did you land on those sorts of choices for yourself?
I don't know. I think we kind of just found it. I think this episode, it was the beginning of the real kind of everything coming together and us all deciding this is going to be the tone. But I don't know. I just sort of launched into it and tried it. This is what stuck. And it's really fun. I do have to say, Rufus Sewell is an unbelievable tennis partner in all of this. As you can see, I mean, we like drill lines over and over and over, and then the stunt people come and we go, take off, like we're just gonna go for it. And we did. And but he just rolls with it, as crazy as I am, and is like, we do it together. And Nana Mensah is so good in that episode. Otto is so good in that. I mean, everyone there, the actor, the crew, the cast is so strong in this show that you know, it really helps elevate everything.
Yeah, I mean, Otto's character, Stuart, very quickly becomes someone that she trusts and she understands has her best interests at heart. And so for you, what are the kind of like the key components that make her really trust someone? Because even just having people in the inner circle that know about the reality of her marriage with Hal being on the outs.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think she trusts people a lot, but I think yeah, he's just a decent human being, and I think she sees that, and it continues. Yeah, I mean, I should say that, but there was something I was going to say, but it's a secret, I can't. Okay, so, but I adore him, and you know, I think it's funny with actors and acting, like there are people who are such great actors, and then there are obviously, but you have to have something intrinsic in you or innate, and Otto has such a decency within him that and it shines through, and I think that's really important for that character.
Yeah. And then with David Jesse, who plays Dennison, you know, there's this beautiful undercurrent of romance between the two of them, and they both kind of know that they can't overtly act on it. They're always in rooms surrounded by other people. And so how did the two of you find how you wanted that to play out? Because it's all in the subtext of political conversation.
Yeah, right. It's such a different frequency. I mean, the two people of Rufus Sewell and David Jesse could not be more different in their frequency, but it really helps in a ensemble cast. But I think I think the story of what Deborah has created, that there's always an obstacle, I think that's just helpful in some sort of like sexual tension. But I do think David has just, as an actor, has such a different rhythm than me specifically, and that makes it just attractive because they're so wildly different.
I also love watching a character where she doesn't fold herself into different versions of herself for different people. And if she's talking to either of them or she's talking to the president, it's the same version. And was that something that was important to have that consistency in who she is?
Oh, that's really true. I don't think I consciously made that choice. But I think from the very first episode that Deborah wrote, it was so clear that this was a person who, I mean, and like how fun, but like a person who is just unapologetically herself. She's not polished in the best way, and you know, and that's such a good observation. And you're right, she doesn't change like the way we kind of all do, and that's her fault and her best thing, you know, that she's just herself. And I think I love people in life who are like that. They make you feel comfortable to be around because you always know where you stand with them. And that's very much who she is.
I was, you know, it's such a great scene to see her in the moment where she is kind of just laying all her cards on the table and what she says to the president right after fighting her husband in the bushes, because she plans to quit and she's telling everybody that. So it doesn't matter. She has nothing to lose in that moment. And so how is that scene a little bit different with the idea of there's nothing for her to lose here?
Oh my gosh, the best. 'Cause first of all, the fight scene was so fun. I mean, it was so fun. It was so crazy, and it just got crazier and crazier, and Rufus was so up for it. It was so much fun. So to like do that crazy physical, sweating, like intense thing, and then to go and pretend to talk to the president was out of control. You're so exhausted by that point. You look like absolute shit, and that's such a free place to be, especially for a woman. I'm sure men feel it too, but I think it's more for girls. And but you know, to just be completely free of all of that, to be dirty and ripped up and not poised and exhausted, and then to go talk to the most important person is a really is like a free place to come from. In fact, it's like a great place to come from for all moments in life. I wish I was like that more.
And the fight sequence is such a brilliant eruption, but to get her to the point of, you know, physically attacking her husband and screaming, "This marriage is killing me," you know, there has to have been build up to that. And so how did you make sure that you were capturing just all of that tension and all of that frustration that's clearly been building for years, and especially the last few months for her, to make sure that by the time you get to a scene like that, it feels justified for the character?
Oh, brother. Oh, it's so good. How did you know, we didn't talk about it too much. I feel like the one thing we did, you know, when you shoot in those big houses in London, there's a big house and there's nowhere to sit for those fancy houses that you go in and they're like, "Oh, you can't sit on any of the furniture." No. And you're like, "Oh, okay, so should we just stand around?" And there's like stone floors and you're like, "Oh, okay, great, sure." And they're like, "Oh, don't walk on the grass, don't walk on the grass." And you're like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'll just sit in the rocks." And but so there's a lot of kind of standing around with your castmates. And Rufus and I, that was a huge, long scene. And we did it really fast, but we would just sit there and run the lines over and over when we were shooting other scenes, waiting to go on. And then I think when it came, learning the lines that well gave us the freedom to kind of move in and out of when it finally came time for the beatdown. And actually, I have to say, Deborah Kahn, who wrote this, there's a moment in the fight, and we just went for it, but she said, "I really want this moment in the fight where you like kind of pretend you're done." And she goes, "I did that as a little sibling. We would be fighting, and then I'd be like, 'I'm done, and I'm gonna kill you.'" And she's like, so that was her saying, I think this is, and I was like, "Is this gonna work?" And it is hilarious. But I think Rufus, in general, is a very free, alive actor. And so whatever he chooses, whatever I choose, we just roll with it. I mean, we do crazy shit together. And we just go, okay.
I mean, it sounds like from the very beginning of working with Rufus that the two of you just had a really intrinsic sense of what this marriage was going to be, what the history of it was going to be. And so did that really help you in not even necessarily needing to kind of go dig into the weeds with each other when it came to when they're having a fight, it's all about the history of something that happened 7 years ago that they're still pissed about that they never spoke about before?
Yeah, I just think, I mean, I would love to make it more specific, but I really think there are certain people you relate to instantly and there's certain people you don't. And it works or it doesn't, and we are just, it's super easy. It's not like we go out to dinner and talk about our feelings or something. In fact, I don't think I've ever been out to dinner with them. But we show up and we're like, "Let's go." And, you know, and it's really, it's like playing a sport with somebody. You're a good match or you're not. And he's a great match, and he adds so much. And but that scene, what's great is it starts so serious, and then I don't think I anticipated how much it would be hurt. Like when there's that line where she's like, "I called Rick, and I fucking called him," and he's like, "You did." And you know, and we all know what that means. We've never talked about. Well, that's a total made up thing. Like who's Rick? You know what I mean? We never talked about. That's never been mentioned before. But it's just such good writing that you know what that's supposed to mean. And it just, the ups and downs of that scene are so fun.
when you were talking about the restrictions of the locations, I forget who it was on the cast that I heard talking about, just the idea that even these spaces were built historically years ago, and they were physically built for men as well, and now you're playing this female ambassador that's walking into these male-laden rooms, and I was interested if that was something that kind of you knew or were conscious or thought about at all.
Well, there's a scene, it's not from this episode, it's when we go and shoot in the country, which I believe is like episode 5 or something, but there was specifically a scene where I am surrounded by all these very important men and we're at a table and the chairs are very large and I have to keep like scooting myself in, and then there's a certain point where I'm like, well, it's gonna be best to sit on my legs, and so I kind of go like this, and to make myself higher, to like really focus on what everyone's saying, but be an equal. And I have one of my oldest girlfriends that we grew up together. She was actually on the Mickey Mouse Club with me. And she became like a big time lawyer, which is hilarious. And I, through that whole scene, thought of what, and people are constantly coming over going, can we get you a pillow? Do you want to sit on a pillow? And I'm like, I'm good, thanks. And I thought of her so much in that, and because she constantly talked about what it was like to be the only girl in the room, and to be this tiny girl. She's like 5 foot nothing. And I do, this season in particular, this first season, my professional girlfriends that I spent those formative years of my 20s in New York with, growing up, this was for them. Like, it was so for my girlfriends.
And, it seems like a small detail